could miss the whole season. We just need to acknowledge it. Is there any Kawhi Leonard leaving the Clippers possibility? What do we know? Because I don't care if he's injured. Teams will line up to get. We saw with Kevin Durant. If you're a top 5-6 player, teams are going to line up to get you, even if you're going to be out for the season. Maybe. What do we know about Kawhi?
I've gotten no indication that Kawhi Leonard is interested in doing anything but re-signing with the Clippers, rehabbing that injury. And you talk to other teams and agents who might be talking with the Clippers. The way they're proceeding certainly seems to be with Kawhi Leonard in mind. And listen, you don't know until a player signs that contract, but you just said it, Zach. This is a torn ACL. And there's an expectation that he could miss next season. You tear your ACL in the playoffs, especially in a season where we're pushed up against next season a month later, like they can't assume he will be on the court next year, so they've got to proceed accordingly here in free agency and at the draft with their own players. But I don't have any sense that he plans to do anything but to continue forward with Paul George and that group.
So if it's status quo in LA with Kawhi, and the current intel best we have is it's going to be status quo with Damian Lillard in Portland for a while. I don't think that deal, as of now, that doesn't appear to be something that's happening this offseason. That leaves us with the other big name that we've got to mention that will absolutely be in play this offseason, is already in play right now, and that's Ben Simmons in Philadelphia, which is the other obvious Beal team that I mentioned. This is a very complicated situation. His value, I think, is at an all-time low after just a really bad series against Atlanta where it looked like the free throws and everything was in his head. He passed up that dunk in Game 7 that was just, frankly, jarring to see. What's the latest we have on Ben Simmons?
The Sixers are engaged out there in trade talks, and they're taking on offers, they're making offers around the league. They're trying to get a sense, listen, who's the best possible player they can get back, because they're doing a trade to want to continue to be a championship contender. Like, they don't have to they can't be in of a mindset, and I don't believe they are, of we just have to move him. He's got 4 years left on his contract, and they can't overreact to that Atlanta series.
4 ironclad years. No options, no nothing. 4 ironclad years.
Which means he really has no leverage in where he could go. If you trade for Ben Simmons, you've got him under contract. He's going to come and play, and that opens up the landscape of teams. But I think it will be serious this week. And they're certainly, if there's a deal out there, they're going to do it. But they also know they get one crack at this, and making the wrong deal, it takes them out of championship contention with Joel Embiid in his prime. They've got to be really careful. But Daryl Morey, like, it is hard for him to, when there's a deal to be had in the air, no one loves making big deals more than him.
Well, they went after Harden and didn't get Harden, and everyone thought, well, if they don't get Harden, Beal's the next logical target. But I think a name that's really interesting as an inflection point is C.J. McCollum in Portland. A Simmons for McCollum swap, who has to throw in draft equity, they'll argue about that. But that has made theoretical sense. Theoretical, I say, because McCollum comes to Philly, and he's the guard that they don't have. The shooting, playmaking threat fits well with Joel Embiid. But then if you're Philly, you start to say, well, boy, that puts a lot of pressure on Joel Embiid to carry the defense almost by himself. And we saw what happened to Rudy Gobert in the playoffs when Utah built that kind of roster with them. And as you said, they don't want just anybody for Ben Simmons. They want an all-star player for Ben Simmons. And CJ is a very good player. He's never been an all-star team. When they look at Portland, they see the other guy.
They want the other guy.
They see the other guy.
Who's not available.
And say, we want that guy, which to me makes it for a very interesting situation. If this to offer me an offer sheet, who needs a point guard, and there are a couple obvious candidates, right?
I think in a perfect world for both Lonzo Ball and the Chicago Bulls, they end up together. But as you said, it is restricted free agency, which means that the Pelicans can match an offer sheet from Chicago. They could also work a sign and trade and get some assets, or they could just let them go. Remember, we know New Orleans would like to get involved with Kyle Lowry, and I think there's a sense of perhaps them being resigned that Lonzo Ball won't be on their team next year, but can they, even if they match an offer sheet, now you have him as an asset. I know the other thing you can count on with New Orleans right now, they've got that 10th pick in the draft, and they are attaching it to trade offers with Eric Bledsoe. So they want you're going to have to take on that $18 million contract for this year for Bledsoe, and maybe even a Steven Adams in some scenarios. But I think certainly Bledsoe if they're going to move on from 10. So they've been active in those talks, but I think the Bulls and Pelicans talked about Lonzo Ball at the trade deadline, and I thought they kind of got close. They were dancing around it. I think in the end, there was just some draft capital that the Bulls resisted putting in. They had obviously used picks to get Nikola Jokic, but Vucevic, yeah, they did not get Nikola Jokic.
They would be throwing a party in Chicago.
They would have given all Arturas Karnisovas would have given all his picks. Vucevic, excuse me. Anyway, that's where I think a lot of this starts with Ball. We talked about Dennis Schroeder on the TV show. You know, they certainly with the Lakers, the easy thing is for them just to do a deal together. But if he's out in the marketplace, if Chris Paul, Mike Conley, Spencer Dinwiddie, Derrick Rose is another name in Chicago. I don't think he's at necessarily the top of their priority list, but if he doesn't return to New York, is there a role for Derrick Rose with the Bulls? And I just think there are a lot of contingencies all these teams are working through.
Well, I mean, there's just a ton of subplots that are interesting when you talk about the Pelicans. Number one, if they're dangling that 10 pick as part of a salary dump, I hope they're getting another first-round pick in return that's just lower, right? I hope they're trading down in the draft.
That's right.
Because to me, just giving up a first-round pick, I get the reason, I get the salary mechanics, all that. I know that they have a million picks coming from the Lakers. They're still too early in this rebuild to start just giving away picks to me, unless if you move down 7 spots to Memphis or something, like that's not so bad. You can get roughly equivalent players at 17 and 10. But this sort of is almost reminding me of Anthony Davis 2.0 when they got AD, realized we have a transcendent talent, and then just went whole hog rushing to get veterans around him, and the team just wasn't good enough. And I think with Zion Williamson, I just think they have to be careful. Feeling the pressure is one thing. Like Zion is a transcendent talent. We saw with Trae Young just now. If your young guys might be 22, 23, if they're ready to win with talent around them, they're ready to win. I just be a little, just try to thread the needle like the Hawks did.
And I think the Pelicans hope that if, let's say they got Kyle Lowry, veteran point guard, that it is in some way, and I don't think they're not going to be in the NBA Finals next year, but in some ways it could impact their roster the way Chris Paul impacted those young players in Phoenix. I think I understand the thinking. Certainly he'd improve them. They want better decision-making and maturity, all the things that certainly Lowry would bring you, but there's a big market for Kyle Lowry. And you're talking potentially $25 million a year, $30 million a year for Kyle Lowry. It's going to be expensive to get at him in free agency or a sign and trade.
After Phoenix, I'm hesitant to rule out anybody making the NBA Finals like 10 months in advance. No one, if we had sat on this show a year ago and said, we might make the finals, Phoenix. Keep it up.
I thought, hey, listen, when they made the Chris Paul trade, hey, they're going to make the playoffs. I think they're a playoff team.
We thought they'd be good, but finals was. I want to go back to Chicago for a second because I think it was kind of an under talked about story at the end of last season. They put in a lot of draft equity and Wendell Carter Jr., who's I think a decent NBA player, to get Vucevic. Didn't make the play-in tournament. Couldn't even make the play-in tournament in the East. Now, Zach LaVine was in health and safety protocols. That was a huge deal that really hurt their season. But I think it hasn't been talked about enough that this is a team that's under pressure to win next year. They have to get in the playoffs next year. They have to make a leap next year. And when you look at their core, they don't have this giant Hawksy young core of guys. And that's why the Lonzo thing is so interesting to me. Are they going to be able to get him out and out in free agency? Is it going to cost them Lauri Markkanen, which is a name like you barely hear anymore? That was the rumored deal, was Lonzo for Markkanen.
That was the deal.
What is going to happen in Chicago? Because they need to put together a team. They're alarmingly dependent right now on guys like Thad Young and Tomas Satoransky. They need to fill out this roster.
Yeah, and you just mentioned Satoransky. That's a player that there's a lot of interest in him there, and I think especially very good teams see him as a guy who can just fit in and play a role. Yeah, this is an important summer for this Bulls team, and I think Billy Donovan, Mark Eversley, their GM, and of course Arturas Karnisovas, their president, trying to figure out what the right mix of players looks like. This was a team that was playing really fast last year, and then you trade for Vucevic, and it slows down a little bit. And I think, listen, he's you can play a lot of offense through him. They've got to figure out, and playmaking was certainly, a big part of that. I think, this is a team that, you're exactly right. They've got to figure out their identity. They've got to get a playmaker to run it. And the Vucevic trade sped up the pressure
big time.
on this team to not just, like you said, not just be able to get in the play-in, but be like, they think they should have a team here now that is a perennial Eastern Conference should be contender. They're still a ways away from that.
And we forget things like this, but another guy that went out in that trade was Otto Porter, who the Bulls didn't give up a ton for. Otto Porter was Jabari Parker and Bobby Portis, who now feels like a ton because he's fresh off the final stage. And Otto Porter just didn't work out. He was part of